Hello, early childhood teachers. This presentation will review the acceptable use policy to determine responsible technology in your classroom. Our objectives. We will identify the role of an acceptable use policy in DCPS, then determine students and teachers' roles in this policy, and lastly, we'll determine early childhood considerations for the acceptable use policy. You may be wondering, what is an acceptable use policy? Well, according to Common Sense Education, it is a policy that outlines in writing how a school or a district expects a community of members to behave with technology. This will publicly define acceptable and non acceptable behaviors and the consequences of using that technology. DCPS's stance on the acceptable use policy. DCPS has created two policies, one for students, which is in the green, the student safety and use policy, and the blue, a social media access policy. Both of these policies is based on the federal law, CIPA, which stands for Children's Internet Protection Act, and it specifically deals with the concerns of students accessing inappropriate content. DCPS's stance addresses technology. According to DCPS, all info on any device issued to teachers or students is owned by DCPS. These devices include iPads, laptops, document cameras, printers, smartboards, or any devices run by technology, as well as the network use, user accounts, and wireless internet access. The Student Safety and Use Policy for Internet and Technology addresses two areas. The first is prohibited internet. Some of the key factors in this policy is that students under 18 should have parent supervision on any wireless network and email that relates to DCPS. It also talks about the private information of students being protected. That's their address, their name, their birthday, passwords, telephone numbers, anything that deals with the identity of a student. And lastly, it talks about it being prohibited for students to meet strangers that they have communicated with online. The next important area that's addressed in the student safety policy is prohibited email content. Now, the email conduct is very important. DCPS advises students not to make fake IDs on any platform over the internet, including social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. It talks about refraining from hate speech, such as calling people fat, or a bimbo, or a stupid, or a wannabe, and refraining from any content that has nudity, cussing, or violence. The way DCPS holds students accountable for these policies is by having students and their parents sign an acknowledgement form listed here. The full student tech policy can be found at dcps.gov publications, and the whole address is listed there at the bottom. Please feel free to click on that. Now, you may be wondering, how is this appropriate for early childhood teachers and their students? Let's look at that. Here are some teaching tips for you to consider when thinking about an acceptable use policy for our youngest learners. Number one, communicate policies with parents and students using age-appropriate language. So instead of calling it an acceptable use policy, you may consider introducing it to your parents and students as using a kid-friendly name, such as Being Kind with Mr. iPad. There are also some resources that you can use to introduce this to students. It can be introduced during homework, whole group assignments, and sensors. You can use read aloud tech books such as My First Book About the Internet or The Computer Trouble. All of these books can be found on Amazon for under $20. Tip number 2. Display guidelines for reference by all stakeholders. You want to consider the vocabulary and the content you use when introducing it to students. The policy we looked at earlier for the DCPS students overall was very lengthy and it used a lot of big words. So we might want to consider using words like, I will always use two hands to carry my iPad. This is more age appropriate for what our students would need in order to use technology. Another thing to consider is the length. It is important that it's nice and short and straight to the point so that our youngest learners can understand and their parents will be able to use the same language with them at home. So instead of a long, lengthy policy where students have to sign, you can just post something like the acceptable use policy listed here. I will always wash my hands before using my iPad. Or I will always use two hands when carrying my iPad. Both of these resources can be found on the blog soarinsanity.com. And the last teacher tip for early childhood teachers is to review guidelines regularly and check applications before introducing it to students. So there are a lot of free applications on iPads specifically that are very beneficial to students, but sometimes we have ads that may come up that are inappropriate, using profanity or inappropriate pictures for our students. So be sure to check any applications that you're considering before introducing it to our students. You also want to make sure that the private information is protected. Do not share your login with anyone. Also, be mindful of any private information that you may share, pictures that you might take in the classroom and how you post them on the website, because we want to make sure that our students are protected at all times from everyone. According to DCPS, any violation of these policies could result in disciplinary or legal actions. To get a full review of consequences, please visit the link below from OCTO, the Office of Chief Technology Office for DCPS. Website link listed below. Now, sometimes you might find that you are trying to access a URL, like maybe TED Talk or TeacherTube, and it may be blocked by DCPS. According to the policy, that's acceptable. But if you find that happens and you need to use it for instruction, you can contact OCTO, and that process takes 5 days. You submit the content filter configuration change form to OCTO. And you can do this by contacting OCTO at the Office of the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. Their contact information is octo@dc.gov. If you can't get them a hold on email, you can call them by phone at 202-727-2277. If you have any questions or you feel like you're in doubt about anything related to technology usage or security, always ask your supervisor, which is in this case your principal, or contact the Office of Chief Technology Officer. Enjoy, and I'm looking forward to all the protection and safe interactive activities that you will be using with technology this year.